A man goes to see a therapist and talks about the scariest night of his life, when his car veered off the motorway, the steering suddenly completely out of control. Now luckily, he managed to bring the car to a halt. He had some whiplash and his nerves were shredded, but it could have been worse. And 2 years later, he's driving again, but only around town very carefully. He can't go near a dual carriageway and he avoids big sweeping bends. The therapist asks him if he can picture this in his mind. And he can, really vividly. The headlights suddenly pointing away from the road, he begins to sweat, his hands tremble, and the therapist asks him to rate his current distress on a scale of 1 to 10. The therapist then asks him to look straight ahead and to focus on a strobing light like this. It's set up right in front of him. And she gives him these handles to hold in each hand. And he sits and he follows the movement of the light with his eyes. And the handles pulse in sync with it. And he does this for 40 seconds. And he's asked to picture the scene again. Has anything changed? How does the panic feel now? Feels more at ease. The number, the rating begins to come down. And the idea of being able to drive again, confidently, feeling safe again, starts to feel more real. How is this happening with lights and pulsing handles? A woman who was relentlessly bullied and humiliated at school. She's being asked to recall one of the worst incidents. So she revisits that corridor in her mind and those two girls who tormented and attacked her. The therapist asks her to repeat an agreed phrase. Even though I was bullied, I deeply and completely accept myself. And then to tap a specific place just under her nose a number of times and repeat the phrase again. Now more memories of these two girls come to mind, but as she pauses, repeats the phrase, taps here and then on her collarbone and repeats again, she can feel the tears and the terror start to abate from tapping and repeating a phrase. What is going on here? A man describes the day he discovered his fiancée's affair. The woman he loved and was due to marry, he's seeing the reality of who she really was. And the rage and the humiliation wells up in him just thinking about it. Now the therapist helps this man to slow his breathing and asks him to close his eyes. And he guides him through playing a mental movie of this event, this horrible discovery, this movie of all the bad stuff with a lot of heartbreak and despair in between. Now in this state of relaxation with his eyes closed, the therapist asks him to imagine a screen and then to watch the movie on the screen. And imagine he's got a remote control in his hand so that he can stop and start it, watching it, speeding it up, rewinding it, playing it back again, all in his imagination, in his mind's eye. And it starts to feel different, boring even. This bad memory doesn't feel as compelling to watch or as emotionally affecting. An imagined TV screen, an imagined remote control, and watching that memory backwards and forwards. 3 different and quite surreal sounding ways of working with traumatic experiences. The kind of life experiences that can trigger anxiety, OCD, depression, and of course, PTSD. The threats and the humiliations that stick around after the event and get in the way of us getting on with our lives. Now, it might be a single thing that happened one day or a trauma that was sustained over months or years, and we pattern match to it today. We're right back there again. Things set us off. After one session, a couple of sessions maybe, people can be out there again, driving again, relating better to their partners, doing the things we want and need to do in our lives. How does this work? Well, it's something to do with the amygdala, a small part of the brain that looks a bit like an almond. And one of its roles is looking out for us. Something nasty happens out of the blue, it really takes notice. In a split second, in that freeze moment, it learns to watch out for that in the future. I've got this now, says the amygdala. We're going to be on alert for it. Think of suddenly coming across a snake when you're on holiday. Oh, you walk away quickly. And then the next day, there's a dog's lead coiled up on the ground and you jump at that. It's a pattern match to the shape, the colour maybe. It's completely automatic. The amygdala says, yep, I'm just doing my job. I am looking out for you and I am activating the fight, flight, freeze system. I am protecting you and there are going to be false positives. Sorry, I'm just doing my job. Now, over time, the lesser things settle down by themselves. 2 weeks later, the dog's lead on the ground doesn't make you jump anymore. But when it's more significant, impactful, sustained, traumatic memories get stuck for years sometimes, much to the detriment of our lives. A more traditional therapy approach was to talk out the experience in a safe and supportive environment, discuss what happened in detail with the therapist, how it felt, how it makes me feel now, week after week of exploring all the feelings around it and making sense of it. Now, this is well-meaning therapy, but recounting it over and over again can reinforce the negative effect. It can be re-traumatizing. So these modern approaches are more of a brief intervention. EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and it's based on the theory of bilateral stimulation of the brain. That's the eye movement and the synchronized pulsing. This is thought to help the brain reprocess events, reducing the emotional intensity and impact. And it's used for PTSD, anxiety, and phobias. The tapping approach is called emotional freedom technique, EFT, and it's based on a different premise, reducing emotional distress by rebalancing the body's energy system. The mental movie approach with the TV screen is called the rewind technique, and it's developed by Dr. David Muss, and it's another form of mental reprocessing in a state of relaxation and feeling in control. The amygdala, always noticing, gets to experience the memory in a calmer and very different way visually. This is different. The amygdala lets go of it, and the memory can be filed away in the hippocampus as a regular memory. It's emotionally discharged. Now, I'm massively summarizing here. All three of these approaches have a protocol to follow and a deeper explanation than this. I would say that they're all based on theories that are up for debate, like balancing the body's energies, but there is positive evidence of effectiveness for all three of them. What I think they all have in common, and potentially explains their effectiveness, is this reprocessing element combined with actively doing something, focusing, tapping, playing and rewinding a mental movie. There's an element of dissociation going on in a positive sense. The therapist and the client acknowledge the bad thing that happened and the feelings around it, but we don't get bogged down in it. Okay, that happened. Let's see if we can do something with it now. One way or another, we're kind of nudging along that natural healing process, that letting go, putting it more in the past emotionally. We're not changing the memory or hypnotizing it away, we're working with it. And as a therapist, I know the least about EFT tapping. I have training and experience in EMDR, but the rewind technique is my go-to for this kind of thing. I think one key benefit of the rewind technique, the TV screen, is it's non-voyeuristic. If you don't want to talk about the trauma, that's fine. A lot of people don't, because we can set up the movie, we can do the work, and the therapist doesn't need to know anything at all about it. And the rewind technique is pretty quick. It can be explained, set up, and done in a single session. Sometimes we do it a couple of times, a couple of sessions. Sometimes it works really well for one memory, so let's do it for another experience. And we do get good results. People feel lighter, freed up, often the following day after a really good sleep. I think EMDR has a strong selling point for people who don't visualize things very easily, or they prefer to keep their eyes open. The light, the stimulation, gives their mind something to actively do. Again, a kind of dissociation that allows the deeper shifts to happen. Sometimes this is all the therapy we need. It lays down the foundation for further therapy for anxiety or OCD or whatever. We feel more emotionally settled, we have more capacity to move forwards. That's my quick summary of rapid trauma treatments. And I'd like to give credit to Joe Griffin, who co-developed Human Givens therapy. He was talking about these kind of approaches and making sense of them 20 years ago, and his insights are still valuable. I hope this has been interesting, and thank you for watching.